Remember, with your shapes tools, pay attention to what mode that you're working in up here, shape, path, or pixels. It really doesn't matter as long as the outcome is the same. I like to use shape, that way I can edit and get my full control of everything that I'm working with. Also, when I use it, I want to make sure I'm making a new layer. So if I made a circle, I can change up the circle. Let's make this one red so we can see it. Pay attention in my layers. I've got a new layer that I can work with and be able to edit and change around. Let's talk about layer effects that you can add to layers that we're working on. Of course, whenever you create something, it's on a transparent layer, and you've got your whatever object or whatever picture you have is the pixels that are inside of that layer. And wherever I move it around, you can see it's updating my little icon. The effects are little things that you can add to a layer that adds contrast or adds some sort of pop or punch to whatever you're working with. You can find them at the very bottom of your layers palette, the little FX. You can click on it, and these are the different kinds of common layer effects that you can add. If you double click on the empty area of a layer, this will also open up your layer styles and layer effects as well. So there's two different ways of being able to get to it. On the left-hand side are the listing of all the ones that you have. If you click on the name of it, I've also got preview turned on. You can see a preview of what the effect is going to be. In this case, if I want it to look like it's beveled or embossed, I can now click on, especially if I click on the name, change up the depth of it, make it look larger, or the size of it, soften it up. Each one of these has a little bit different kinds of effects that you play around with. Playing around with lighting sources, playing around with contours are some of the things that you'll want to do. You don't always have to use these. Some of these are more common than others. If you uncheck it, it won't apply that layer effect. A common one I use is like a drop shadow. This guy adds a little bit of a shadow. Notice that when I clicked on drop shadow, I clicked on the check mark, but I don't get the effects for this one. But that's because I still have bevel and emboss still selected. You got to click on the name. Once the name is selected, then I can start changing up, for instance, the color of my shadow. If I want it to be a blue shadow, change up the distance from there or the size of it. How soft I want the edge to be, the angle that it's at. So playing around with the effects, playing around with what you want to do with them, this all comes into selecting the name of it. You can have multiple effects, so if I wanted to, in this case, let's do an inner glow. So have this thing light up almost like it's glowing on the inside of it. Some of them are more subtle, some of them are a lot more powerful than others. When I say OK, this will go back into regular mode. Check out my layer that I have now. It's got a little FX icon to the right-hand side of it, and it lists out all of the effects that I've applied to it. If I want, I can turn on and off the visibility of it by clicking on the eyeball. So if I wanted to see what it looks with and without the inner glow, I can do that. If I clicked on the master eyeball, I can turn off all the effects. Or if I opened it up again, double click, I can add more effects to this. I can add like a little stroke outline to what I'm working with. Part of it is just playing around to see what you need. Sometimes you don't have to add everything to it, but it does come in handy. And of course, if you needed to erase away a effect, either you can turn off the eyeball, or if you clicked on the name of it, you can drag it to your trash can, and that'll get rid of the specific ones, or you can get rid of all of them altogether. And those are layer effects that you can add to it. As far as filters go, these are a little bit more fun that you can work with. In this particular project, they're going to give you some smaller images, and they're going to ask you to apply a filter to these images. Filters are a way of taking a picture and kind of adding some artistic touch to the way it looks. As a graphic designer, whenever I see people use Photoshop filters, it's kind of an amateur move if you overuse the filters. I can tell when you use a filter rather than having a good design. Like putting a filter on a photo, yeah, it looks cool, but it doesn't make it really a good design that I want to look and see. Having good design principles will do that. So I try to keep my filters to a bare minimum whenever I have to work with them. But here's what they do and what they look like. First off, notice what color mode I'm working in. What does it say up there? RGB. Working in RGB format. If you take a photograph, most of the time it's going to be in RGB. If I was to swap over, go to Image and Mode, to CMYK mode, so this would be something that I wanted to be printed. It's going to ask me, are you sure? We'll say OK to that. I'm going to go up to my filters. Notice that some of these are turned off. Most of these filters only work in RGB mode. So if for some reason your document is set up for CMYK, you won't have access to your filter gallery or your camera liquefaction. You will have some of the other kind of filters that you can do. If I go back to RGB mode, click on filter, now I get full access to working with these as well. So let's choose our filter gallery. These are the more fun ones. Off to the right hand side, these are all of your effects that you can choose from. If you choose artistic, you can make it look like, colored pencil, cutout, dry brush, different kind of little artistic effects. Whenever you select one of these, also pay attention to the controls that it has from here. You can change up how the effect looks, adding detail or less detail to it. Sometimes you don't know what you get until you play around with it and add on to it. I am just adding one of these at a time, but notice at the very bottom right here, I can add one effect. If I click on New, I can add another effect, so I can have both the Sumi and an underpainting applied to both of those as well. As far as sketch goes, with these, by default they're going to be black and white. Actually what it's setting up is your foreground and background color. Notice that my foreground is black and my background color is white. So wherever I choose one of these, it'll look like this. They're like a little graphic pen type design. However, if I was to change my foreground color, let's make it like red. And we'll do a background color of, we'll do a dark blue. Now if I was to apply one of the stylization or sketch ones, it uses red and blue as that particular color. So if you use these and you want to add on to them, changing up your foreground background color is another thing to pay attention to as well. They are a lot of fun. Usually what I like to do when using filters, if somebody sends me a very low quality image, something that just doesn't look good, and especially if I have to blow it up and it's going to be really pixelated, I'll make it look artistic. I'll send it in, I'll put a Photoshop filter through it, and so it looks nice. I can blow it up and look big, and it still has kind of an artistic flair, and I don't lose the feel of that particular image that I'm working with. When you say OK, it's going to change up those pixels and apply it to the layer that we're working on. Now, I just opened up the image and I applied the filter to it. There's a downside to doing that. If I do that and I go to save this image, it's going to save over all of those pixels. I'm going to lose the original that I'm working with. So very often, I don't want to lose my original. I want to work non-destructively. So I'm going to undo what I did. In order to keep your original image and be able to undo this, what I do is I'll convert my layer to a Smart Object layer. Smart Objects give you the ability to save a copy of whatever layer that you're working on so that you can always go back to it. Got my layer selected. Up at my layer options, I can choose Convert to Smart Object. This will give me this little icon down here. Now watch what happens when I apply the filter to it. We'll keep the same filter as it is. We'll say OK. Just like with your layer effects, it gives you the smart filter effects, and I can add on to this as well. I can also open them up, and if I didn't like the way this looked, I can double click and I can go back and change it again, and it'll update that image. If I just applied that filter to a straight layer, not a Smart Object layer, I would have lost my original image. I couldn't be able to undo it. Plus, I can add on more filters to this as necessary. Hey, that looks kind of cool. Say OK, and it gives me that particular look and feel. Pretty cool? OK, so that's adding layer effects and smart filters to that particular layer. Last thing I want to show you is using clipping paths within Photoshop. Oftentimes, you need to have your images clipped out or masked out to a specific shape or to a specific area. We've been working with layer mask and vector mask, and these will add a little icon to whatever layer that you're working on. In this case, the car, we drew out the outline of a car and we masked it into this area. A clipping mask is what we have for these type of layers, and they're layer independent. So on one layer, you can see I've got inset 1 is this image. With it inside of its own layer, this allows me to move my picture around, place it exactly where I want to go, or change up the shape that I have and move it around and change its size as well. I couldn't be able to do that, at least I can't do that very easily if I'm using a layer mask. Let me show you how to create one of those. Let's go back into our original. If I've got my image, let's add on a picture of Mr. Abby and his little girl. So notice how I've got the setup. I've got the circle on one layer, and above it I've got the image that I'm working in. I can change it, I can scale it down as necessary. With that layer selected, I can go to Layer, down to Create Clipping Mask, and now it's masked inside of that area. Notice I get a little arrow that points down to the layer that it's being clipped to. Again, I can move it around, I can resize it and change it. I can even add layer effects to my bottommost layer. Let's say I wanted to add a drop shadow. I'll double click, add a drop shadow. Let's make it darker. Put it whatever I need, and say OK to that, and it'll add the shadow to that. If I was to add the shadow to this layer, it won't really work. That's because it's being masked inside of this area. So as you add layer effects, pay attention that you're adding it to the correct layer. In this case, the bottommost layer that I want, not the topmost layer as well. You can add on multiple layers. Let's say I was working in this, I wanted to add like a little shadow or a darker area. If I added a new layer, with it selected, do clipping mask, and whatever I paint or put inside of this layer can also be masked out. So if I grab my paintbrush tool, I can paint inside of it and it stays nice and clipped within this area. When I teach a digital illustration class, this is the way we do most of our digital paintings. We'll do an underpainting of every shape and object, and then we'll paint inside of it. So in this case, if this was an actual painting, I'd make a circle, I'd grab my paintbrush, and maybe in one layer I would add all of my, let's add some darker colors, I would add all my shadows to one side of it and build those up. Since all I'm doing is painting black, you can see even in my my icon staying inside of that. Without the clipping mask, it would look like this. Oh, by the way, you can hold down the Option key and click in between two layers. That's a quick way to add or unadd a clipping mask. Option and click between the two. I could then make a new layer, clip that one up, Option, click between the layers, and I could add my highlights to there. Maybe choose a lighter red and go off to this side. A little bit lighter. Okay, anyway, so that's one quick and easy way of using and creating and working with clipping mask. For this particular project, they're going to ask you to create 3 different little simple shapes down here and be able to clip each one of these 2 here. The trouble a lot of students run into is they don't have the stacking order correct with this. I'm going to unmask all of these. They're going to ask you to bring in all of your pictures, and you can see the pictures kind of will overlap one another. And we'll put the inset 1, 2, and 3 are all stacked together. You need to have your image right on top of the correct little shape that it's to be masked to. So if the right one is on the very far right, there it is there, and then you need to choose the appropriate picture and place it on the right, but also move it on top of this one. So inset 3 is on top of here. When I go to mask it, layer, great mask, it'll mask to that one. If you don't do it, let's say inset 2, this is our middle picture. Notice it's at the very top, and I've got the center picture. If I was to choose my inset 2 and try to create a clipping mask, it's not going to work. Which one did it clip to? Inset number 1, which is actually that picture over there, so it's not going to work with this one. So your stacking order of your layers, very, very important that you reassess each one of those as you create them. Oop, don't even need that one. All cool? All right, if you have any questions on these, remember, you do need to print these off. Let me know when you're ready to print, and then we'll work through from there. All right, turn your computer back over to you and let y'all continue to work.